here with David Klein. Hey, David, how are you?
Great, how you doing?
Yeah, awesome. How are you, Woo?
I'm doing amazing.
David, from our previous conversation, I know that you are a coffee and 90s hip hop loving.
A lot of 90s hip hop, a lot of coffee, and occasionally some photos, taking some photos.
Awesome. So today, what I'd like if we could maybe cover two topics. First is about structure and your sort of internal processes that you use for life and work and everything like that. You seem like you're a really structured kind of guy. And
Sure.
secondly, I'd like to talk about hobbies, as you just mentioned, photography and coffee and 90s hip hop is stuff that you're really interested in. And I'd
Yeah.
like to just dig a bit deeper into about what makes you tick personally, just because I think it's
Great.
so important to learn a bit more about each other.
Great. Wonderful.
Awesome. So, as I said, you're keen on your tried and tested processes,
Yeah.
whether that's for work and life. Could you just sort of give us an example? So, what's your sort of normal morning?
Oh, my normal morning outside of work before I get there. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
actually a lot of news reading, a lot of tweet consumption, checking Instagram and New York Times. But then, of course, it's just actually a lot of time and quiet time drinking coffee.
Right.
So I spend probably almost an hour reading in the morning and
Wow.
just thinking about the day. And I haven't really, I've tried having a journal. And I went out and got one of those fancy, look at me, I'm a cool designer, black journals with the white pencil. But it just didn't
Nice.
stick. I just felt like it's really good just to read about what's going on in the world, what's going on in the design community, bookmark some longer articles to read during the day, and really take my time sipping coffee
What
before I head off to work. Yeah.
what publications do you read?
New York Times and then just whatever other people are linking to.
Right. Okay. So you
But New
so you
York
sort
Times
of
is
open your phone and
yeah.
scroll through Twitter and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it used, back in the day, of course, it also included Tumblr and,
Oh
a
yeah.
heavy addiction to Facebook and then checking out Flickr. But of course, it's pared down over time.
Do you use Reddit?
I've tried. I've tried to get into Reddit, but it feels like people who use Reddit are more into comments, and I don't really
Right.
care about comments. I just care about the content. So actually, whenever I share tweets to a group of friends, they always say, "Oh my God, look at the comments! It's crazy." And I'm like, "Oh, it didn't even occur to me to look at the comments. I
Yeah.
just, I just want to read the text."
Just don't do it on
Sometimes
YouTube.
yeah, exactly. Sometimes
YouTube.
the comments are where the fire happens.
Exactly, exactly. So I don't know. I've tried to subscribe to a few subreddits, but it just hasn't stuck yet.
Yeah, I've never really got into Reddit. How about you, Wu? What's your news consumption cycle like?
I have pretty much it's kind of sad. I've like cut out the entire world. I feel like it's so bad that I don't really look at Facebook. I don't really look at Twitter, and if I do look at Twitter, it's like mostly just design related or things like that.
Yeah.
So it's really sad. Like sometimes I'll hear about like the terrible things that are happening like a month afterwards, and I'm like, I had no idea that that happened. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, it was a very conscious decision to kind of like cut a lot of that stuff out because there's just like so much misinformation. Like I'd rather just look it up myself at this point. But
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I think it's really important that if you find yourself frustrated with your morning routine, if you go into work and you're already like, "Ugh, I'm so tired of this," that it
Yeah.
actually is pretty healthy to unfollow as many people as possible and really take your time to do that.
absolutely,
And earlier this or late last year, I think I went through Twitter and just saw all I see is political tweets, and it's really taken me down. So I just unfollowed like half the people on there, and all the defunct startup, Twitter accounts had to get rid of those too, and I
yeah,
found myself to be very happy with that decision.
yeah. Was it like a
Have
noticeable
you?
change?
Oh, absolutely. It's pared down significantly. So it used to be a lot of journalists, political journalists, a lot of politicians, and it just frustrated me like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And the same for Instagram. I
Yep.
over the years I started following, random people who took one great photo, and I realized this is untenable. And
Yep.
I can't be a completionist anymore. So I just unfollowed everything that wasn't an actual friend.
Yeah. So have you like changed your behavior now? So every time, so I've noticed this, I guess rewinding a little bit. So now that
Yeah.
I've done kind of the same thing where I've gone through, I've cleaned out all my lists. Like my Facebook is the only things that I really, really like. I only check it like once a week anyway. But like Twitter is all like mostly just people that like either I know really close or are like really super interested in what they
Yeah.
have to say. So now when I go to follow somebody, like I consume a ton of their content before I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, follow now. Like it used to be
Yeah.
like kind of like you, where you get like one or two cool photos, and then you're like, okay, yeah, let's follow
I'll
this
follow.
person.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you have like 2,000 people,
You're
and you're like,
drowning.
yeah, like who is this person?
Who are these people? I don't even remember. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
have you noticed that
Yeah.
your behavior has changed now? Like when
Oh
you're
yeah.
trying to follow new people? Yeah.
When I try to follow new people, it's still the same process. I still do succumb sometimes and just say, oh,
Sure.
this person I met, or this person wrote something interesting, or I see an interesting retweet and I'll just hit follow. But yeah, it's definitely, once you pare it down significantly, it's you can take some time to build it back up again.
Sure. Sure.
And your sort of the people you do follow, you mentioned sort of news companies and politicians and stuff.
Yeah.
Do you consciously follow other designers as well, or do you find that
Oh,
sort of
absolutely.
vacuous?
I follow a lot of designers. However, if there's any sense of this person loves themselves more than what they're writing, then I kind of go, I don't need this. Or if it's like pompous or like, look at me and I'm amazing. My favorite way to unfollow is whenever a new product is announced. If someone tweets, I've had the chance to beta test this for months, I'm just like, oh, love myself too much. I can't handle that. It's like, yeah, I beta test stuff too. It doesn't mean I have to like brag about it. It doesn't matter.
There's gonna be that
So I
one
just
guy
think
that tweeted, I beta tested, and you unfollowed him, and he's like super sad right now. Like, man.
Yeah,
You ruined his day, man.
He doesn't know. They
just
don't
playing.
know. But yeah, I think that's just obnoxious. It's like,
It's
yeah,
I think
I
it's a
beta
fine
tested
line,
bourbon.
isn't it?
You know, like before Instagram, I was on bourbon. So what? Okay, now I'm that guy.
That's it. End of the call.
Yeah, goodbye. No.
Do you have any like favorite people you follow? Is there like certain people that you're like, this person just puts out like incredible content like every time they tweet, like the one on
You're
their
catching
list?
me off guard. I have to go through the list and see.
Just
I
say
think
me.
there's just for design stuff. It's hard to think of one person. It's really a mix. You don't want someone who's just constantly talking about, oh my God, check out CSS Grid, or oh my God, check out this article on Medium. You want some people who are like a mix of, wow, they're actually like good people and they think about things that aren't design, but then also spend their time thinking about how to improve. I don't know if it's randomly onboarding or photography in a product, but yeah, I could do that. We could put that in the show notes, like my top favorite people I follow. I think Michael Beirut is actually really great because he does a little bit of both. He does life, he does politics, but then he also talks about Pentagram, and he has a great podcast. So I think that's one that I randomly always look forward to seeing a tweet from him.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of designers in particular struggle with, is that you're kind of forced to think that you should only be talking about your practice. And
and I think
to have a life is something that should be bad.
And I just saw an article recently. I have to go look this up. I can't remember what publication they were talking about how in San Francisco or in the Silicon Valley lifestyle, the work is your life, and there's no longer a concept of work-life balance. First of all, I disagree with that. I think that's crazy. I don't get any sense of that in San Francisco, but maybe because I'm getting older and I actually have a family. But yeah, it's so important to step away. And even during the day, I find it very important to go out for coffee and walk around the neighborhood and take some pictures. Because if you just sit there, you're never going to solve your problem just staring at your screen for hours and hours. You have to let it digest and get away from your computer to be successful. I find, at least.
Speaking of which, do you have like any kind of habits that kind of get you away from your work? So for example, I do Pomodoro, where it's like basically every 25 minutes I get like a 5-minute break, and then every, I forget what it is, like every 3 breaks you get like a 15-minute break. But do you have any kind of like habits that like something that says like, hey, get up, disconnect, make sure that you're kind of like resetting your brain? Because I feel like there's this thing that happens in design when you look at something for too long, you get a little snowblind, and you have to like kind of make these cadences to say like, hey, I'm going to disconnect from this. I'm going to go look at something else for like 5 minutes, check my email, whatever it might be. It could still be work related. Maybe just stand up for a second and look at your monitor sideways. You see designers always do that, like head tilt or whatever, to kind of like reset their brain. But do you do anything like that says like, hey, it's time to like disconnect? Or are there any like triggers that say like, hey, I've been looking at this for too long, like I need to reset my brain?
Yeah, I never heard of this Pomodoro thing. I think that would be problematic for people who love numbers, like myself, and I would constantly be thinking about, okay, I'm 91% through, I'm almost to my break. I think it just happens naturally. So for me, it's a full day. So I will design and then I will walk away at the end of the day. And then what I love to do is first thing the next morning when I get to work, I open it up and I look at what I did and I try to see if it connects and if it makes sense with fresh eyes. So it's not really like chunks of the day. But I think the walking away and getting a cup of water or a cup of coffee or going around the neighborhood, it's usually like, I work really hard from like 9 to 11. I try to just get through everything as quickly as possible. And then I like to go back and think about what I'm doing or go back and read what I wrote. So the other weird thing about once you're a decade into your design career or 12 or whatever it is I find that I do a lot of writing. And as however many mock-ups I'm making or flows or prototypes I'm making, a lot of writing and collaborating with product managers and engineering managers, engineers. And you kind of have to start thinking about the product more than the interface. Yeah. And how does this holistically fit in with the rest of the product? How does it fit in with your release? You're constantly thinking about the sprint. What are the engineers working on this sprint? And how can I support them? What are they going to work on next sprint? And how can I prepare for that? And it's really a lot less of Sketch or Photoshop or whatever tool you're using and a lot more bigger picture and strategy. It's you have to rise up out of the design world and think about, okay, realistically, can they build this in the sprint? Does it fit what the product requirements are for the product manager? And just constantly be in tune.
You touched on a really important point there, I think. And it's
weird. He asked about habits. I don't know where I went there.
Yeah, that's cool. What I think separates someone just starting out from someone who has been doing it for a while is that they spend less time in the tools and more time thinking about the support work that you have to do. And something that I'm consciously doing at the moment is writing a lot of documentation for everything I design to make sure that someone else can pick it up, or if I happen to leave, that the rules are somewhere that someone can go and find.
Yeah. If you
That's something you two do.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys ever read Good to Great. It's an amazing book, but they kind of talk about that too, where they talk about really, really good leaders. They kind of like segment them into different tiers, and I think it's like a level 5 leader or something like that, like the highest one. I could be getting this wrong, so don't quote me. But the highest level leader always kind of like prepares the people that are going to come after them to say like, hey, here's the kind of things you need to do to be successful. And I think that we as designers, I think, can learn a lot from that too, because this is more like CEO level kind of like strategy and like advice. But the whole idea of like passing things on is so important, because I can't tell you how many times I've left a project that in my head was like, and it came out great and the project was awesome. And then what happened 6 months down the road, like it completely falls apart. And then you think about, why did it fall apart? It's like, oh, I didn't set up the person after me for success. Like I gave him the assets. I gave him like all the design, just assuming that they somehow like know what was in my head or knew like why I made certain decisions. So I started doing things like style guides. I started doing stylescapes. I started doing all these things to like help align. I'm sure Louis kind of has something like similar to, where he's kind of documenting all of his stuff to say like, hey, here's the kinds of things you have to do to be successful. And here's the things that were in my head and why we made the decisions that we did.
But it's also something you need to justify. You need to be very upfront with everybody in the business and say, this is required for us to do this. And we might slow down on the amount we deliver, but ultimately it's going to speed everything else up.
Absolutely.
If you think of everything as a pair, you need a problem and a solution to go with it. And so if you prove all of your work with even if it's something insignificant, if something small, if you phrase it as a problem and a solution, then people will understand, I think, have a better understanding of why you made that decision, as opposed to just arbitrary decisions that you made randomly. So I think, first of all, what you're describing, I think, is not a design problem. It's like everybody has that problem. And engineers talk about the same thing, even with their own work. Like, why the hell did I write this code?
Absolutely.
And so with designers, if you're using Quip or Dropbox Paper, I think if you just every mock-up, every state having a problem and a solution, and just trying to keep it like as part of the flow of why did I do this? Why did I make this? Why did I make this decision? So that like even for yourself, 6 months down the line, like it's not a surprise.
Do you think that having this mindset of bigger picture, larger goals sort of thing ultimately leads you to work at enterprise-sized companies, or do you think that that's something that should be just a standard for everywhere?
I don't know if it's the mindset. The challenge with enterprise companies is that you're not really designing a product. You're designing an operating system,
Yeah.
and specifically to Salesforce, it's like an operating system in the cloud. I mean, it's a web-based operating system. The extensiveness of the product ecosystem is so vast that even 18 months in, I'm learning stuff every day. It's crazy how much it can do. It's actually kind of amazing when you think about, oh, it's just CRM. It's like, no. It's crazy how big it is. And it's really exciting actually to keep learning about it. So I think it's just being a good designer. I don't know if it's about, it's startup versus enterprise. All these things just make you a better designer no matter where you are. The thing that led me to enterprise, if we just want to get more personal, was the challenge of doing something that was just beyond one product, one app, one interface, one flow, and just thinking about, collaborating with designers all over the place and trying to move a strategy, a big strategy, like a big ship over time, a little bit at a time, is so challenging. Whereas at startups over and over and over again, it was, how do we get this thing out the door? How do we get more funding? How do we get more users?
Yep.
And like, that was all boring. And not to say that I succeeded there. I failed several times. It's very hard to get people to sign up for something. So I thought, okay, well, here's a new challenge. How do you get people who already use a product to be happier using the product? How do you introduce new functionality to a vast ecosystem of products? So the documentation thing, I think that's good no matter where you are, just to get in that habit. And I think the same goes for programming. Just, of course, good commenting your code. But the other challenge is when you work with so many people, your presentation skills and your ability to integrate with other teams, your ability to share your work, and your ability to raise the business overall. So it's not just about, okay, well, this release, we did these 5 epics, but yeah, how does that work with other teams? What if one of your epics, that's like your big projects for a release, what if it touches on another product, or how can I help another team with my work? And that's where it gets really fun and really, really hard, because there's other teams in other countries that are doing things similar. Well, how can we save time and be more efficient together? So that's why I'm actually really happy where I am, because I think it becomes a personnel challenge and not just an interface challenge.
Sure. And can you maybe talk about just like your day to day? Like what do you do throughout your day? Like how do you start your day, like your professional day? And like
Sure.
who do you interface with? Like what are the kinds of things that you like run into on a daily basis? Like what are some things that maybe you were surprised by in your role that you kind of learned about, or that I know that's kind of like a lot of stuff, but kind of like
No,
just
no.
like what's your day to day
Sure.
basically?
The biggest surprise so far, and I'm sure other designers can relate to this, is that when you have a good product manager, your whole life changes, because that's really your partner. It's not your other designer. It depends on the product. Sometimes you have multiple designers working on the same product, but I focus on one product, and I have one product manager and a couple engineering managers, and then and engineers. I'm not sure how many. It ranges. And having a good product manager is just the greatest thing. For that person to think about, the points and the sprints, and also the requirements and the stakeholders, and just being able to bounce ideas off that person, even though they're not necessarily an expert in design, they know what the customer needs to solve their problem. So that was a huge surprise and just such a blessing to have that person who I get to talk to basically all day, every day. That's when I roll in. God, I'm so cool. You say hello to everyone, and there's a couple of emails. I find that the less email you have, the better your life is. So I'm very lucky that when you have something like Slack, your number of emails goes way down. So you catch up on a couple Slack questions that may have come in late, a couple emails, but then you get right into picking up where you left off in terms of preparing for the next release, preparing for the next sprint, and then answering questions. So what happens usually is that you start a sprint and you have all this material prepared, all these, maybe little prototypes, little mock-ups.
Really quick, can you explain what a sprint is for people that maybe don't know what a sprint is too?
Sure. Sorry. So if you have, let's say you have a release that you want to launch something in N months, and then you divide it up into a number of sprints. And a sprint is a set amount of time. Some companies do 1 week, some do 2 weeks, some do 3 weeks, and depending on how addicted you are, I don't know if addicted is the right word, you are to the agile process, to the Scrum process, the idea, and this is where it can get, you could read books about this, where let's say you have a group of engineers and they're all going to agree to an amount of work, and they rate all the things, all this like list that the product manager puts together of things we want to accomplish. This is I know this is awesome. I kind of dig this stuff. So it usually uses like a Fibonacci sequence, and like this task is 1 point, this task is 3 points, this task is 8 points. And the idea is that if you get to a task that's too many points, it's too big for a sprint. You have to break it down to smaller tasks. So it's a group of 1s, 3s, and 5s, and then 8s and 13s, or whatever the numbers are. And then you say, okay, our team last sprint did 42 points. This sprint, we have scheduled 100 points. Well, obviously, we're not going to accomplish that because our velocity doesn't get there. So we have to decrease the amount of things we commit to. So a sprint is a set number of tasks where the engineers agree that they're going to commit to this number of tasks. And then we have to prepare those engineers to make sure they have the assets they need to accomplish those tasks. And then at the end of a 2-week sprint, we have a retrospective where we say what worked, what didn't work, how we can improve the next sprint, and so on. So your team gets better over time, better at predicting the number of points they can commit to, better at predicting how challenging a task is and how many points it needs. Sometimes points equates to hours. But yeah, that's a sprint. It's just a set number of time where you have a committed number of tasks.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
So every day it's like, there's 20 tasks this sprint, and half of them I need to address. And so, and engineers will have a lot of questions about like states that weren't necessarily covered in the spec. And I go in and I solve those states, and I provide assets that we're missing, and answer questions. And then also your ongoing testing. Engineers will say, this task is done. Great, I'll go test it. And, it's not necessarily QA, it's more of like a design test. Does the interface match the spec? And then give some feedback, go back and forth, and then we mark it as done and move on to the next task. So imagine that, but multiplied by n number of engineers happening simultaneously. It's a lot of communication. It's a lot of quick calls and quick demonstrations, and then quick compromises of something's like, actually, this is going to take 8 hours to do. Can we find a compromise and maybe get it down to 2 hours? So it's a lot of collaboration and communication. And that's why I was saying before, it's not as much many mock-ups as it was when you're earlier in your career. It's a lot more communication, collaboration, and even compromise. The 3 C's, the David Klein method.
There you go.
All in all good
Trademark
bookstores.
Yeah.
I'd just like to. I've just got one final question for this section. And feel free to ask any more for both of you. But you just mentioned about communication in particular being very important to get stuff done, and I'm assuming that's a lot easier for you when you're in the office. Do you, or both of you actually, ever see yourself being someone who could work remotely or permanently alone in your own office?
I think remote is fine. I work with remote engineers every day. I talk to them, and doesn't take away anything. The only time, the people who I think should not be remote, I think it's so healthy to be able to talk to your product manager face to face. You two are kind of leading the entire show. Not to like take away credit from other people, but it's like you, the product manager, the engineering manager, are just making sure everything's running smoothly. I don't know if I were remote, I'm sure it would be fine. I would get to make my coffee in the morning and the afternoon, whereas now I don't get to make a cup in the afternoon. Although I used to bring my entire coffee kit, have a duplicate set that I would bring to work. And then I got older and thought I looked a little crazy. People were like, what is that? A custom temperature kettle? What are you doing? I had like a Hario V60 with a stand and like it was really cool.
It's allowed if you're wearing a monocle.
It's a lot of what?
It's allowed if you're wearing a monocle and a top hat.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's very classic.
Thank you for laughing. That was a terrible joke.
So I think remote is totally fine. I work with a remote designer. I work with several remote engineers, and we hire a lot of remote people. So I think it's great. If you're happy and your work is good, what's the difference?
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, that's a nice way to finish the first section then. As I mentioned, I'd also like to talk a bit more about your hobbies. Sure. Let's just sort of dive into section 2. Hashtag hobbies. You just mentioned something very specific, that you have a coffee kit. Now, I didn't even know that was a real thing. Secondly, please elaborate.
Yeah, so the coffee kit,
was it in a briefcase?
I wish. It's usually a box, a boring cardboard box every time I start a new company. It's a thing I've worked on over many years. and gotten more and more into over time. So I once worked with a designer many years ago who had a similar kit, and he would sit at his desk and hand grind his coffee with a very fancy brass hand grinder. And I thought, well, that's interesting. He must know something. And he made great coffee. And I was still using a one of those pod machines at work, and I would do like a French press at home, and I didn't know what I was doing. And so you just start to read and experiment. And what's great about the coffee world is all these products are super cheap. So the Chemex is like $25. The Hario V60 is, I think, 26.
Sound like you're talking about cars. The turbocharged RV coffee machine.
And then, so it's really affordable, and it's also really easy to just try different styles. The only part that's expensive is the kettle. To get a kettle that you can control the temperature, the degrees, or Celsius or Fahrenheit of the water. But it's just so easy every day to try a different variation. So you can put together a little coffee kit, which has you need the kettle for the temperature. Because you don't want to have boiling water it's not gonna be good for your coffee. You don't want to have water that's a little too cold. You need that perfect. Some people say 195 degrees. I lean to 202. You need a good grinder, so a good hand grinder at home, or if you have a burr grinder that's connected to an outlet, great. Hand grinder is fun because you really connect with the process because it takes a few minutes. So you actually like kind of earn the coffee, and your arm gets tired. You're like, oh, I can't wait for this. And then you got to have the purified water. And then you have the right beans. So I subscribe to mistobox.com. I highly recommend it for anyone who's interested in upping their coffee game. You get a concierge person that you can email whenever you want. You can specify the type you want, and you can specify the frequency it comes. I'm such a big fan of Mistobox, Misto. And then I have my own mug. Yeah. I bought an Apple mug back when I interned there many years ago. So I would have my little mug, and that would be my kit. And so I replicated it at home and at work. I even once set up a kit at my mom's house in case I ever was over there and needed a cup of coffee. It's just something you iterate on over time. And it's just like it's part of that morning routine of just disconnecting, not disconnect, but like not worrying about just reading and starting your day and being thoughtful. And for some people that involves, bullet journals or whatever it's called, but just being mindful and preparing yourself for the day and thinking about what you want to accomplish.
I think in general, I feel like designers need to slow down. It's something that I see all the time, like everywhere I go, and it's like the more that I try and I keep bringing up martial arts, and I'm so sorry, but it's like one of the central things in my life. So almost every episode, I swear I bring this up, but it kind of has taught me to like slow down too, not because I kind of like take lessons there and I bring them into my work life. And one thing that I notice, and I'm so guilty of this myself, is I don't slow down. I don't like take those breaks as much as I should. And like the older I get and the longer I do this thing, the more I realize that I need these cadences. I need these like stop points to like kind of disconnect, whether it's in the morning and you're kind of just letting your brain kind of relax and you're not like go, go, go. Because that's like the days that you slow down and that you're kind of looking at it almost third person, you're kind of disconnecting yourself from the design. Those are always when like the best designs come out, and it's when it's almost like effortless, when you're in that state of flow, right, where you're kind of like the world's gone and like this thing is just like you're like something's different. And it's usually because I take notes throughout my day, kind of like to try to figure out, what I'm doing well, what I'm not doing well, like kind of things that are going well. Like I have like kind of like a checklist. If I've like done my one task that I really, really, really want to do, have I done that thing? And it's like a big green check mark. So I go throughout this day and I kind of like check all these things throughout the day. And I've been going back, and that was one of the things too that I noticed is that like when I disconnect, my process is like it's always stronger, and I don't know if you've noticed that or if you made that change and it was like if it was gradual or if like you just noticed, one day you're like, oh, holy crap, like my work that comes out is like way better. But I see this in like a lot of other designers too. It's not just myself. It's not like I've started paying attention to this, and the ones that can kind of like sit back in their desk and like they're kind of like spacing out and they're looking out into nothingness and they look like they're not really working. Those are the people that always make the best designs. It's really funny because they're like kind of seeing it in their head, or they're disconnecting from the process, or they're like resetting their brain, whatever it is that like I feel like everybody kind of does it a little differently. differently. But whatever it is, it's like that disconnection process. It's like I feel like so many more people can do that, and I'm kind of curious what you guys think about that. If you guys have noticed that, if you think that's for everybody, because I don't know if that's just like, is that just an artist thing? Do programmers do it too? Is it like I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are on that.
My boss has said to me on a number of occasions, "Are you okay?" Because I'm just sitting there sort of spaced out in my seat. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm just working something out. Don't worry, I'll be fine."
Yeah.
I think it's
I
really.
don't know. I think it's whatever makes you happy as a person. I think it's very difficult to try to force yourself into someone else's patterns, and I've tried many times.
Sure.
It's just you end up kind of clashing. So I think you just have to try little tiny experiments. Whether it's your idea is very interesting. I've never tried that of keeping a journal through the day. I've tried using day one. But I find writing things down, everyone always says, yeah, you got to write it down. I find it so disruptive because it's a different tool, it's a different mindset, and it's so inefficient, which I know it sounds really arrogant. Shakespeare is probably pissed off, but I don't know. It's hard to say. So I'd love to try that writing things down throughout the day thing. And I also wonder, like, why not take it a step further and set up a private Twitter account and just constantly like tweet what you're thinking? Maybe it could be a fun experiment, and let a few friends follow it, or just add it to your public Twitter account and see how many followers you lose.
Or you could be what was it Casey McDonald, Kyle McDonald, I think that was his name, but he literally tweeted out for like, I forgot what it was, for like a week or 2 weeks, everything he typed was all tweeted. I was like, this dude is insane.
Yikes.
Sorry, but that was a totally random thing. If you guys want to look him up, he's super crazy. He's like this crazy artist / programmer.
I like the idea of the zoning out, but it's fun. They ask how you're doing, if you're healthy. I think the getting up and walking around thing, like I used to do a Rubik's Cube at my desk, and that became a little insane because I was just like, how fast can I do it? Oh my God, I'm so manic. So yeah, I think that was the opposite of what I wanted out of that.
Sure.
But yeah, the ability to get up and walk around and socialize. So I see a lot of people hang out on like our internal wiki or on Slack, just being in like helpful general rooms and answering questions. And I wonder if that's a way to disconnect a little bit from your work and just think about other people's design problems and help them.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's something that I actually do. I do that. I'm in a bunch of designer Slack channels, and throughout the day I'll check in and just catch up with people or answer questions or give feedback on work. And for me, it makes me such a better problem solver. Yeah. By engaging in other people's problems, because you get to think from things completely differently. And whilst you're doing that, you'll come back to your own work and think, oh, I've got a new idea.
Yeah. That's true. Well, that's why I think it's so important to get away from Sketch and have a hobby that is design tangent, whether it be painting or drawing or making music. I see a lot of designers now making music. I see designers cooking a lot now, and just trying to figure out how you connect to an artistic form that is not pixel related. So I do a lot of photography, trying to take photos and edit those photos and see what tools can be used. And it's like I'm using interfaces and I'm thinking about a final product, but it has nothing to do with the flow, or I'm not worried about a user. I'm the customer. And I find that a very healthy way, an artistic way to disconnect. Like, how can I learn more about color? How can I learn more about form and the rule of thirds and leading lines and just like perspective? And how can I, perfect that craft over time? And it's years of commitment. But it's just such a great way to use a computer, but not be thinking about work and not, reading a lot of text. It's just mostly like artistic and clicking and experimenting.
Yeah, this is something that
go out of your. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go.
No, you go.
Paper, scissors, rock. So one of the things that I'd recently been doing, I'll try to make this really quick so that we can get in there. But I started doing Headspace, and they also kind of like help you disconnect by kind of like letting your brain kind of like play with ideas too. And they put you in this like weird artistic mode where you're kind of like, you're focusing on your breathing, and then you're kind of like letting go of all your thoughts. And there's this weird thing that happens when I'm like letting my brain relax, is like the second I stop forcing ideas, like it's crazy how many ideas I get. Like out of nowhere. It's because I'm relaxing. I'm kind of disconnecting, right? I'm kind of doing what you were talking about earlier, where you're kind of letting something tangential, kind of inspire you, even though you don't realize that it's doing that thing. It is in the background. And I used to never believe it until I started doing this stuff, and I started noticing that again. I'm taking these notes, and I'm like throughout the day, when I get to the end of my palm, I'm like quickly taking a note, saying like this went well, this didn't go well, whatever it might be. And then I'm noticing that those are the days that I'm like the most creative too. So it's super interesting when you let your brain relax, like the kinds of things, because it's such a parallel processing like computer, right? Like we don't think very linearly. Like I think we do in order to like act on it, but when things are in our brain, like a lot of times it's just kind of like happening in the back of our brain. All of a sudden, like that inspiration hits, and you're like, oh, that thing that I was painting, like 2 months ago, I'm like, I could use the perspective in that. Or like, you were talking about like the leading lines or like these little tiny things. And then all of a sudden, like these things are kind of connecting where they wouldn't normally connect. And it gives you a one up on other people too, I feel like.
Yeah. Exactly. So like, building that muscle that's in creative world, but not connected to digital products, I find to be so beneficial. And I think, touching on the painting thing, like Mark Hemeon, who's a great guy, a great guy, and he's always posting his paintings on Twitter and Instagram. So, and then the photography stuff is just a way to disconnect and to learn other tools. And then, making music, if you can just download GarageBand and just tool around with it and then see what you can make. It's relaxing. I mean, sometimes it's stressful because you're like, I have this great photo and I don't know what my vision is. I don't know how to get it right. But eventually you just figure it out.
But it's a muscle too, right? Like the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Yeah. And I think cooking is one that everyone should try because it's collaborative, it's fun, and it's experimenting, and it's buying new things and trying new things and trying different cultures.
And it's super
so I think
tasty.
that's one. And it tastes great. Yeah, well, it tastes great if
you're good.
If my wife makes it.
Good point.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What about you, Luis?
Louis, correct. I was actually cooking just before this call, so
nice.
I'm a firm believer in spending hours in the kitchen away from pixels and screens.
Yeah.
Because it allows you to be creative and think on the spot because I don't follow recipes, so I just make things up as I'm going along.
That's
in
my
a sort of
question.
interpretive way that I also do design work. It's all sort of, okay, I feel this is going to work. Let's give it a go. And it does. If you do it for years and years, it does work.
And if you get super lazy, those meal boxes are also amazing.
Yeah.
I've done those before.
Yeah.
I'm not even familiar. What's a meal box? You mean just like, what is that?
Oh my gosh, I don't know if you guys have them where you're from, but they are basically like these boxes and I don't think they deliver them everywhere, but in Southern California for sure they do. They basically give you this box that's like pre-made, and it gives you all the ingredients, it gives you the recipes, everything, and it just delivered to your door, like on your doorstep, refrigerated, and you just take it in and you cook it, and it basically gives you all the stuff. Like sometimes the sauce is already mixed and stuff too, so like you don't really learn some like the technicalities of like the fine details, but for the most part, you get these amazing dinners for reasonable price. It's like maybe like $10 per person, and then you get to just cook this stuff. It's really cool.
Interesting.
Try it out.
I remember doing Forage, which became Din, and that was back in the days when the other ones were just coming up, and now the publicly traded company. What's that one called? Blue Apron.
Yeah.
I've tried it. It's pretty fun.
Okay.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
There's loads of those in Europe too.
We had a few of those local places where you could go by and pick it up on your way home. One I think was called Plate or Plated or something. So those are fun. You could argue that it takes away a little bit of the fun because it's so rote and so much of it is done for you. But you could also argue, it's so convenient and delicious. So I could see it going both ways depending on what you want to get out of cooking.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you as well. You're both very busy guys outside of the office. Do you think that there's sort of a risk of burnout at any stage, or do you see that because you're so at one with your hobbies that you don't treat it like that, or you don't see it like that at all?
I don't know. It's hard to say define busy because sure, busy because I want to work out as often as possible and also have downtime to relax and disconnect and watch a rerun of The Office or watch a new movie. Or go hang out with my family and see my mom has a Shih Tzu and I love that dog more than anything. Don't tell anyone, but Yeah, so I don't know. It's hard to say if you want to go hang out with your friends. Yeah, I don't know how to interpret that. I don't know. What
Well,
do you think?
by the sounds of things, you don't think you're running risk of burnout.
I don't know. The most important point is when you come home, I think it's dangerous to go back to work. I think it's very important to not think about it. And I think it's great work, whether you have, you can have a side project. So I've done some design, not since I started this job, but doing some designs for clients, and friends, and just thinking about other ideas and trying out new things, with following tutorials or something that you find. But it's like I was talking about earlier, where you come in the next day and look at a design you did with fresh eyes. I think that's so crucial. So burnout, yeah, I've never had that problem. Only when you're not happy with the company that you're at. That's, I think, the dangerous burnout territory, where when you come into work and you're like kind of dreading your day. That's when I've hit burnout, and you gotta fix that somehow, whether it be switching products, teams, or even companies. Because otherwise, if you're not happy to go to work, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a tenable lifestyle, maintainable.
Or both, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really nice point to wrap this up.
Sure.
Really, really pertinent point that you just mentioned. I think it's very true for us to reflect on our jobs and reflect on our lives as often as we can, and to realize that if we are unhappy, we need to change it, because no one else is going to fix it for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And yeah, the thing that you're waiting for at the unhappy place is never going to happen. No. So it's really important and I know that it's a very position of power thing to say. You could just leave, but you got to put together a portfolio and just network like crazy and find another opportunity if you're unhappy.
Exactly.
But I don't want to end on an unhappy note.
No, I think it's positive.
It's a good thing. Design's awesome.
Yeah. You sort of realize that you're in control of your happiness at the moment, and that's really important.
And if you're unhappy, get a hobby. Figure out what makes you happy, and then pour your life into it.
Mm-hmm. Get yourself a coffee kit.
People. Yeah, gotta get a coffee. Find a group that takes photos around town and go hang out with those people. They're super nice. I've done a bunch of Unsplash photo walks in San Francisco, and yeah, just find another community to hang out with.
Nice.
Great.
Nice.
Well, thanks for coming on. That was really, really cool. Really enjoyed that.
Thank you so much for appreciate it. Yeah.
It's been a blast.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
All right, take it easy.
Bye.
Peace. All right. Thanks so much for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed that one. We just wanted to ask you one quick favor. We work crazy hard to bring the guests on and all the work that goes with it. We only ask you two things. The first one, if you aren't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button, whatever platform you're using. We're pretty much on all the platforms. And second is to just share it with somebody you think would enjoy it. That's all. It would mean so much to us. Thanks, everybody. Peace.